What we have come to realize, that magical phrase, energy transition, you don't get that unless you have a materials transition. And I can tell you that no one has thought about what that is, how it's supposed to happen, when it's supposed to happen, with what kind of investment requirements, who would do it, where it would get done. That's been pretty much kind of just this black box in everybody's forecast.
I think everyone recognizes that we're not getting away from oil and gas, and we don't want to get away from oil and gas. But how can we improve everything else that we do? How can we take what we do well already and apply it to some of these alternative energy sources and better our society and provide us with hopefully cleaner and more ample energy for the next 100 years or 200 years?
Land insights, market trends, industry experts. Welcome to the Land Department Podcast, the state of land and energy as we see it.
Brad, I'm excited for this guest that you found for us. I know. This is not, we don't get a doctor and a fellow at Rice University on the podcast very often. I had to put on a suit and shave and make sure my mustache wasn't crooked today. No, I'm super, super excited. First and foremost, for a fellow Louisianian to be on the podcast. I'm a UL grad. I understand, Michelle, you're from Louisiana or went to school there originally.
From Louisiana, deeply rooted, as they say.
All right. Well, man, I'm just tickled pink. We don't get many of those here on the podcast. We don't see many people in the land side from Louisiana here in Houston. But so yeah, super excited to have you, Michelle. Dr. Michelle Foss, fellow at Rice University. Met you and was introduced to you through a presentation that you did at the Landman Social, the HAPL Social, back late last year, and was kind enough to reach out to Michelle. She was kind enough to join us today. So I'm excited to unpack all kinds of material transitions and hard minerals, constituent minerals, all the things that are going on. A lot of the advancements. We got all kinds of stuff to talk about today with elections and the way the winds are blowing in the renewables transition. So who knows where this thing's going to go, but I know that Michelle's a wealth of knowledge. And Michelle, thank you for joining us today. We're super excited. You got to tell us a little bit about where you went to school, kind of your background, what brought you to Rice University and your current job today.
What brought me to Rice was retirement. The University of Texas at Austin. I was the chief energy economist at the Bureau of Economic Geology at UT for a long time. And that was after, many years of career related stuff. And I was asked by the Baker Institute to come in as a research fellow and help them think through some things. The bulk of my career has been spent in the traditional energy business space, I guess we would say. Oil, natural gas, LNG, electric power. That's really where I've spent most of my time. But early in my career, I worked around the mining industry. And one of my alma maters is the Colorado School of Mines. And I am one of the few people around that has kind of had a foot in both sides of things when it comes to minerals, fuel, oil, gas, coal, and also non-fuel, meaning hard and soft rock minerals. So in our world of energy, increasingly, we're looking at trying to do some things that put a premium on the non-fuel mineral side. And everyone is struggling with this. How much do we need? Where is it going to come from? At what price? What cost? Can we get it? Can we do it? How does it fit into the picture? And while I was still at the Bureau, still at UT, we had started to pull this into our energy program that we were running there, the Center for Energy Economics within the Bureau. And we did some good stuff. We started messing around with it in about 2014, 2015. And by the time I retired in 2018, we had put out some provocative things on battery materials, the implications of what people are talking about doing, And it was timed when we didn't really know this when we were working on it, but it was timed with some other things that were going on. So the World Bank's view on minerals was released in 2017, and people were starting to actually realize that to do a lot of things that people wanted to do in the energy technology space would require a different focus, a different set of things than what we're accustomed to. Now, that said, the traditional energy businesses are materials consumers for sure. So steel, we spent a lot of time looking at the coincidence between oil prices and steel, because when you're trying to build things, liquefied natural gas terminals, pipelines and drilling equipment, onshore and offshore, and all of that, you're a big materials customer. So those linkages were kind of already there. But when you start to shift gears and think about things like electrified transportation, electric mobility, using uh, technologies for wind and solar, and trying to do those kinds of things, all of a sudden the combinations become different. And so we were a bit early in the game at UT, and raising some questions that are now, I would say, um, uh, pretty common and a pretty
Still gonna
standard
be live.
part of conversation, as you look around and see what people are concerned with and what they've realized. In the meantime, of course, people have realized that there are a lot of constraints associated with all of those commodities. Some of them aren't even commodities in the true sense of the word. And so, there's with an imperative to try to, within the Baker Institute at Rice University, within the Center for Energy Studies, to try to shine some light on this. And that's what we're trying to do, is just make people more aware of the requirements, the trade-offs, all of those kinds of things, entailed in kind of all these buzzwords that are out there, like energy transition and decarbonization, and a word that I really hate, renewable. I hate that word because nothing is renewable. I correct people all the time on
Exactly.
that.
There's a prize.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of finish with that, what we have come to realize, which is what a lot of people have come to realize, that magical phrase, energy transition, you don't get that unless you have a materials transition. And I can tell you that no one has thought about what that is, how it's supposed to happen, when it's supposed to happen, with what kind of investment requirements, who would do it, where it would get done. That's been pretty much kind of just this black box in everybody's forecast, that really hasn't had nearly enough thought or time and attention and focus. So that's what we're doing. That's where we are with things.
Why do you think that's what's kind of been left behind? Is it the ugly truth? Is it? I mean,
Everything has unintended consequences, and I think that just is a very big bucket of unintended consequences. So when I was in the 1980s, when I was in graduate school at Colorado School of Mines, we had a mining industry in the United States that was quite vigorous. And what had happened was that the mining industry had a really long slog through the 60s with low commodities pricing. So the oil and gas businesses and the mining businesses had kind of been in the same place. Um, in the years preceding the 1973 oil shock, that thing happened. The Arab oil embargo happened. We had an oil price shock. Everybody is scrambling, trying to figure out what to do. And we had a renaissance in the coal industry, coal mining businesses in the United States, because coal became a source of energy security. We're in the Carter administration by this time, right? 1970s. He's trying to deal with this stuff. Everyone is talking about shortages of natural gas. We had that going on at the same time. That was a policy, regulatory induced situation. We're looking at oil shale. And then all of these things had requirements that brought the metallic commodities along with them. So a lot of copper projects got off the ground because copper prices were surging with oil prices. Nickel had its first round of price increases. So the metals were really benefiting from a lot of investment at the time that everyone was with starting to look at this. The first experiments with batteries happened in those days, late 70s, mid to late 70s. So, the famous Exxon experiment with batteries and other things were going on in those days. And then prices collapsed. Oil prices collapsed, metals prices collapsed, and everybody went through another long slog in the 90s, trying to figure that out. What was going on. I think by the time we got to where we are today, and where people this next surge of interest or second round of interest, a second wave, if you want to call it, in things like batteries and energy storage alternatives and other things. I think by the time that all happened, I think people had become distanced from the raw materials businesses in general. Our mining industry had really faded. Employment levels have dropped considerably. Our degree programs that are mining related, the
Shifted focus.
enrollments dropped. This
Yeah.
is all, we go through these cycles, whether it's petroleum engineering or mining engineering. I mean, you go through cycles that kind of match the business cycle and commodities. And so when we started having all of these serious conversations, when people are starting to do things like try to set targets and goals and all of that, all of a sudden you look at your inventory of assets and where you stand, and it doesn't look so good.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what's happened.
Well,
I mean,
then,
I just think, the usual problem that we always have, ideas sound good, everybody gets excited, you kind of go through this wave of, all right, it captures attention, all of that kind of stuff, but the devil's in the details. Always, 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 always. And so, for lithium-based battery chemistries, if you don't have any of the materials available to make those, then you're not gonna be able to make very many of them. Um, Copper is in everything, so was an instant, kind of, I guess, canary in the coal mine. What's the state of the
yeah,
copper?
reaction rate. Hey,
Where does
we've got an
where are
issue.
we gonna get that?
Yeah.
But there are a lot of other things that are, pretty seriously concerning. When Russia invaded Ukraine, I tell you, nobody except, down in the trenches in the defense industry thought about titanium very much, or, civilian aviation, perhaps. And all of a sudden, we've got a problem with titanium, so these things have been occurring, and it's been like a wake-up call, but not a comfortable one, because you think about these businesses, we always talk about how tough the oil and gas industry, how hard it is to win public support and acceptance and enthusiasm for oil and gas. We'll come over to the mining side, and it is way worse. It is much more difficult to get people to be enthusiastic about large scale mining projects and all that entails. And so it's I just think we've gotten to that through this cycle, and we're kind of now at this plateau where to go forward, some pretty serious decisions are going to have to get made, but we have to decide how serious we are in the first place.
Yeah.
And
How bad do we really want this, and what maybe
well,
makes sense?
yeah,
I
yeah,
think we all experience that in the land side of things. If we look back over, say, the last 5 to 10 years of
mhm,
transitional type energy projects that landmen are involved in, it started with the wind projects 10, 15 years ago,
yep,
through the Panhandle and the Midwest and places like that. And then the EV boom, we're going to do solar fields, and we're going to be electrified and drive electric cars all over the country, in 10 years. And so that spurred all these types of land projects that we were working. But over time, to your point, I think the industry started to recognize, hey, these are maybe not realistic targets. Maybe we're putting more emphasis on things. We're trying to build a roof before we have the foundation poured. And so, started to see these other types of projects. I mean, I got calls, as a land broker from people looking at copper projects in South Texas and West Texas. 20 years in the business, I've never had someone call me and start talking about how we can help them with copper mining. Um, the brine extraction, the lithium extraction through brine was not even a discussed thing. Now we've got projects going all over, 3 states doing that type of work. So, ultimately industry will find and do their best to try to meet a need for some of those basic components. But to your point, yeah, you're very much right. We've neglected our mining capabilities in the United States, and now we're dependent on things that come from across the world,
Yeah.
that are affected by geopolitical things and war. And
That's been the other leg in the stool in all of this. In the intervening years, as our mining industry faded and shrunk, and our mining programs dropped in enrollment, and all of that kind of stuff is happening, our consumption patterns didn't really change very much. And what we've simply done is replace domestic resources with resources from other places. Not always as raw material, because we don't manufacture a lot of stuff that people use. It gets made elsewhere. So we're basically importing the materials in other forms. I mean, we import all the materials that go into the LED screens and boards and everything else on smartphones, in the form of the smartphone, right? So all materials
Yeah.
are already there. They're floating around the world in various supply chains, from the point of extraction to the point of manufacturing and assembly, and it shows up, in a box at Best Buy. So that's what we're importing our materials these days. So the same thing happens in vehicles, washing machines, hair dryers, you name it.
Okay.
The whole thing. So our supply chains became globalized, which is a whole topic of conversation. What that means, who's in charge, who's on first, when it comes
Yeah.
to all that. And then the sort of the second implication of all of this is it just exacerbated the distance between the things that we use, the objects of desire, and where stuff comes from. So people really don't know this. They don't know what's in our daily appliances, our tech gear, all of that, and the point of origin and how it comes to us, pretty much is just not, part of
Oblivious,
like, you know, um, uh, reality when it comes to a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, so like with that, I mean, we've invested, I mean, untold millions of billions of dollars in this transition, the thought of the transition, right?
Yeah.
And so whether we like it or not, to a certain extent, there's the ship is moving in a direction now. When we get to where it's headed, who knows? And where we're going, who knows what that's actually going to look like from a sense of, how we power America and how we do all the things and make all the things that we need to use as Americans and the world of 30 years from now. And I think the last 4 or 5 years, we've started to kind of see some realities sink in to things that are viable, things that are not viable, things that as a blended, concept, work. What types of projects, in the energy transition, the alternatives type projects, do you think really have a more of a viable, life, in a meaningful contribution to our needs as a society in America? To try to reduce carbon emissions and all the things that they're saying that they're promoting and want to happen. What do you think's what types of projects are viable and could contribute, and maybe which ones you think just don't make sense?
So in all of this conversation, what I realized lately, and in fact, we're working on it right now, is we were missing a thought process. So years ago, when people really started to work on these things, all of these assumptions, and what minerals do we need and what applications, was driven by what I call spreadsheet decarbonization. So we had rolled out this assumption that we could link, and I'm going to go out on a limb and a bit of an edge here, and in a belief that we could link reductions in tons of emissions from industrial facilities to something that is actually pretty ephemeral, which is long-term climate patterns and weather, right? So we've been operating in this belief that we can actually make this magical math formula work. And I'll tell you right now that one of the most important things that's going on in all of this, and this actually started really before our election cycle, were some pretty serious questions about whether we can really do this.
Exactly.
But it's politically expedient. It's politically expedient to go out and tell the world, if you want to stop a 1.5 or 2 degree, pick your number, right? Shift in climate at some point in the future, whenever that is, all we have to do is this stuff today. And then we figure out what the formula is, right?
We'll figure it out along the way.
But so if you step back and you say, well, what is it that we really are trying to do? What we're really trying to do is run lights that when we need them, right? We're trying to run factories and plants and facilities, that pretty much have to run all the time, right? 7 days a week, 365 a year, that kind of thing. If you're trying to create value, you're trying to create gross domestic product, national income. You have to produce and sell stuff on which you can collect taxes, right? And sell, you have to be able to sell things. I mean, we are market economies, after all. So the things that never got talked about in all of this were things like, well, okay, if we pursue certain technologies that we think are really attractive because maybe they're lower in carbon at some point, at the point of use, let's say, at least, if not in the supply chain, which is the problem.
Don't talk about how we got,
right?
Don't talk about how we got to that point, but
Well, does that actually hit the other metrics? Does it provide reliable energy that I can count on, that I can control? And one of the dilemmas with a lot of the technologies that people have been in favor of is that they don't meet that criteria. They're not reliable. They don't deliver all the time, which means you have to come up with something to close the gap. And so what's happened is a convergence between this wake-up call that we need materials, which is by itself a problem, right? It doesn't matter. And when I look at this stuff, when I look at what people need in life, for modern living and to be able to do the things that we do, to provide nutrition, to provide healthcare, to have whatever level of security, national defense, whatever it is, they're the materials base that you need for that. And I don't need an energy transition challenge to tell you that there's a challenge with that materials base anyway. This is just kind of, where we are in the world in terms of our capacity, our facilities and everything else. But when we look at, the drivers for this, it turns out that a lot of the things that people wanted to do really didn't make a lot of sense. So what we need to do in order to answer your question, what's the new technology out there? What are people going to pursue and how is it going to pursue? I think what we're going to be forced to do, and what we should have been doing all along, was to kind of push it through a filter. How much energy are we getting out of it? Are we getting enough energy out of it so that the materials inputs make sense? Are we getting enough energy out of it so that the commitments of land and water and other things make sense? How expensive is it? Really, not just, what's advertised. So this has always been the problem with wind projects and solar projects. The equipment has been cheap because it's been manufactured in China. We need to get back to that globalized supply chain conversation. So it's in the market. It's cheap because it's manufactured cheaply, right? But it's expensive to use. And that part of the conversation never got discussed, right? Because I only have the wind resource some of the time. So that means I have to have something else. I have to have backup. I have to have something that will meet that, help me meet that reliability criteria. The same thing is true with solar. You only get solar for a portion of the
You
day,
get it.
right? So you have to
Yeah.
come up with something else. And no one has actually ever really gone out to voters and customers and asked, are you willing to pay for the additional things that would be needed in order to make these favored technologies that we like because we think they help reduce emissions,
Save the world.
we think
Yeah.
anyway. Are you really willing to pay that? And one of the things, so you mentioned the HAPL social last fall. I feel really good about what I told your group that day because it came to pass. Well, we were and over the past year, what we could see was that, voters really aren't willing to pay a lot for this stuff.
Yeah.
You
The
know
answer
what?
is always
They are
no.
uncertain about the case that's being made. Is it really, this urgent? They're unsure about whether they're willing to make the trade-offs on the material side that have to be made, They're even where people favor and like and understand the value of mining projects. There's still a question of what are we doing here, and
Yeah.
why are we doing it? There's not a lot of voter support for the total cost, the price tag, which is pretty high because,
Significant.
it's not a linear thing. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have some losses. We're going to have some unintended consequences. There's going to be lots of zigs and zags. The whole idea that you could do this and the energy transition would be cheap, I think was probably bad advertising because if not, it's expensive.
I think they've realized they've been
People have
fed a bill of
strategic
goods.
needs, so every dollar that you push into a DOE, a Department of Energy contract to help get a wind project off the ground or whatever it is, a battery plant open or whatever, that's a dollar that's out of the federal budget that could have been used for something else.
For something
Voters have
else.
different priorities than everybody else does. And it turns out, and really you can see this in the voting in the election very clearly. It was a pretty narrow
Absolutely.
cluster of people that really thought we should be doing this. So where does that
Mhm.
leave things, for the energy businesses and the energy professionals? Really, I think people are still going to pursue some of the projects that they were pursuing before, but they're going to have to be a commercial test that wasn't imposed previously. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, we've been saying for years,
Absolutely.
the wind and solar businesses need to grow up, for crying out loud. Are they really commercial?
Yeah.
They say they are. If they really are, then
Right.
why do they continue to need the taxpayer to back them up, right? You should be able to go out as land professionals and look at what's needed in acreage to support these kinds of projects, knowing that they have a commercial viability, that we can understand. And that means having a
Exactly.
conversation about all the other pieces, parts that are necessary and how to develop them and whether we're, what it's going to take to really develop them. I think, in fact, we were looking today at what one of the large consultancies just released in consumer preferences when it comes to transportation vehicles. And when you see, and this is not the first time. So, when you see this year after year, you pretty much have to start to wonder what people think. But when you see that Americans still prefer to buy a combustion engine vehicle and feel more comfortable with that, that's going to tell you that moving electrified, fully battery electric vehicles into our market is going to be tough, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. We're a petroleum-based
people have a
society.
lot of things on their minds when it comes to what they choose. And again, the question is, what is it really going to cost? And what is the total burden that, these put on people and on power systems and other things? And do we really understand that? So I think we're going to have a little bit of a shakeout in terms
We're already
of,
seeing it. Yeah.
what people thought was going to be the answer, let's say, or what we were going to pursue as a country. Now, the challenge here is the one that President Trump is kind of rolling up, that we're having a lot of different and interesting reactions to. He wants us to as a nation to position strongly around the thing that we have a lot of, which is hydrocarbons, and the industry that supports all that, right? Our domestic businesses. People want to do that without crashing the price. So he's got industry support so long as everybody can do it profitably, right? Which
we all
means
want to still be landmen tomorrow, you
yeah,
know?
but that means a pretty big conversation about how we do things, what it takes to actually run the oil and gas businesses every day. What you have
And
to
to
have an
keep it stable.
inventory, drilling locations, prospective areas, minerals leasing in places, so that you can start to harvest that. Rights of way for pipelines, acreage for facilities, all of that kind of thing. So you can't not do that. You can't move away from the thing that everybody thought was going to be, the answer, and that turned out not to be so much the answer because it's really way more complicated than anybody was thinking about. But suddenly just jump back to the stuff that without really making sure that you are doing what you need to do, right? For
Yeah.
all of the businesses that So I would say that politically, what's happening right now in the flurry of executive orders, the things that are going on as the administration settles in, they're trying to execute fast, on a lot of things. We can all see that. The trick in all of this is to make sure that we are really building, and keeping our domestic oil and gas businesses sustainable, because we're going to
Yeah.
be needing them for a long time. So I think there's a lot of people coming into the administration that get that, but making sure that the voters understand it, that the industry is with you, that when you're rolling things out, you're rolling them out the right way, and sending people out into the field to do the right things, all that kind of stuff, while you kind of step back on the energy transition, the green energy kit, so to speak, and make sure that that's better situated than it was before. That you really are, pursuing it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, as an industry, we all recognize, I mean, as landmen do land work, right?
Yep.
Whether it's an alternatives project or, a geothermal project, which I think is going to have some traction under this administration,
Mhm.
or a traditional oil and gas job. We want to stay busy. We want to stay working. We want a stable environment. We don't want to see an oil price crash where, we're out of work. I think there's somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah.
I think everybody you talk to in the land community is behind the concept of all of the above, right? Why would we not want to have efficient transportation of electricity? We know there's demand for electricity and it's going to increase.
Yeah.
Where do we get that from? Obviously, we know we have ample natural gas. We've got one of the world's largest oil deposit in the state of Texas. We're a very, rich country in that aspect from a hydrocarbon standpoint. But who wouldn't want to be able to leverage, a viable project that's an alternatives project, and who wouldn't want to get behind improvements in technology for transportation of electricity? I know you've talked a lot about, and you touched on your nanotechnology, is it nanotubes?
And then carbon
Yeah, I mean,
nanotubes.
yeah, I think everyone recognizes that we're not getting away from oil and gas, and we don't want to get away from oil and gas. It's right here. We're very good at doing our jobs as an industry. But how can we improve everything else that we do? How can we make a more efficient electric vehicle if someone chooses to drive an electric vehicle? You
Mhm.
know, and how can we apply technology? And I think a good shift in focus on some of these projects that make sense, that we can apply our expertise as an industry
Mhm.
to. Why not? We're the best in the world at what we do. How can we take what we do well already and apply it to some of these alternative energy sources, and better our society and provide us with hopefully cleaner and more ample energy for the next 100 years or 200 years.
Mhm.
um, I think some governed, approach to this, more analytical, really look at what we can do better and apply what we've learned is the approach that I think we all want to see.
Well, and that's what we are actually hoping will happen. But we all have to keep saying it so that all the folks inside the Beltway hear us, right? I mean, that's the trick in
That's
all of
right.
this. Just to quickly on some things that you said. So, materials science, materials improvements can solve a lot of the problems that we have. So, in addition to being hugely interesting potential carriers of electricity, carbon nanotube fibers can also help extend the life of, say, wind turbine blades, which are traditional thermoplastics right now. So one of there's a huge benefit if you kind of just think this through logically. There's a huge benefit to paying attention to, you know, your basic research and development platforms, and thinking about what you can get out of those that can come into the mix of things that everybody is interested in doing, because we're going to be better off regardless, right? The second thing, back to kind of making sure that we're doing this in a calm and thoughtful way. Um, it's I think Americans are really bad at these days anyway. Maybe I don't think we used to be this way, but I think we've kind of become this way. I think we're bad at worrying about brass tacks or focusing on brass tacks, on basic things, right? We want the glamour and the high tech stuff, the it's like a form over function, or a form versus
Mhm.
function kind of debate. And I think that there are certain things that we need to settle before we move on when it comes to what we do with electricity, and that's the grid itself. So there's been a wake up call on that front, and a lot of people are
100%.
starting to say that we have to figure this out. How does how do our electric power transmission and distribution systems work? How do they interact? How do we what is it going to take to improve them, expand them, make them resilient, all of that, so that we can do all the things we're talking about doing, everything from recharging electric vehicles to dealing with intermittent, power generated by resources like wind and solar. And so, this has been a horse and cart problem from the beginning. We're promoting
The very
stuff
beginning.
like electric vehicles. We're promoting technologies like wind and solar without thinking about the backbone, the grids themselves that all these things are contingent on. So I can see this everywhere, not just in the United States, but in other countries as well. A realization that if we're going to use electricity and it's going to
We gotta have
become
the
our
infrastructure.
staple going forward, then we really have to think about how it works and how we fix it. And
Yeah,
then
I
the
agree.
thing that I think in all of this that's happening is, to a large extent, the concern about materials, these global supply chains. A lot of that happened because in the wake up call that took place, people realized that there was a dominant player, which is China. And so while we were building our shale basins and plays and rolling that out and becoming, adept in those businesses during that roughly 15 years from the early 2000s to today, China was moving in a different direction. It's not not really a hydrocarbon rich country or province. Looking at where they could build advantages, things like, battery making and other areas of technology, became crucial to the 5-year plans that the Chinese rely on for their industrialization. And to make that work, they had to go beyond their own domestic resource base. By itself, from their own homeland resources, China is the largest producer of many metals commodities in the world. Through their own mines, their own refineries and smelters, they're the largest aluminum producer. They're the largest rare earths producer, and that's out of their backyard. But they exceeded the capacity of that backyard and went abroad And those outbound investments, we didn't do. So
We ignored it.
we haven't really we didn't really make the same kind of effort in terms of our supply chains, because again we're relying on China equipment, China manufactured goods and components for a lot of our needs, or at least let's say Asia in general. If you look at the bigger supply network there. And that is really, gonna test things, because there's a lot of stuff that's packed into that. Their manufacturing capacity is far in excess of where we are in the United States, where the Europeans are. That's creating a lot of tension. Um, you know, so those three things, focusing on materials, the properties of materials inventions that can improve things, stepping back and just thinking through electric power grids and what it's going to take to get those in shape so that we can use them the way people imagine we should use them, and then dealing with China. And that's a lot. But that's pretty much, that's kind of my read on where things are, today. When we worry about things like our commodities prices, oil and gas commodity prices right now, I mean, well, one of the things that's clear in all of this is that by promoting oil production, what President Trump is really trying to do is bring oil price down to squeeze Russia. We can see that. So that's kind of linked to that problem of how do we deal with our global context, when it comes to those two countries and their positions in things.
Yeah.
Michelle, I'm curious where you see kind of the future of minerals and mining for the U.S., whether that like you mentioned, means abroad or that means here domestically. And obviously there's a lot of challenges to that, but also maybe speak to not just the mining of the minerals, but the actual production of the minerals into something useful. And I know there's a lot of harm with waste and all that kind of stuff. So what's our approach? What's that look like for us going forward?
Well, we are a minerals rich country. We have almost everything, at least in terms of resource, for everything from like just basic construction all the way to the most sophisticated battery chemistry. We have almost everything in some form of resource occurrence, if not in commercial production. But it's not easy. We don't have the same advantage when it comes to non-fuel minerals that we did in the shale plays, the private lands mix. A lot of what is very interesting is on federal lands. So that means a more sensible federal lands policy when it comes to establishing mining claims, being able to move forward with exploration and production. The difference is the brines. So, part of the attraction of extracting lithium and other minerals from brines is that those, to a large degree, are private land assets, and so they can be chased, a little more easily than some of the other stuff. But when we look at things like platinum, nickel, cobalt, copper, for the most part, these are public lands based assets.
Western US based.
Yeah. And at least, the larger occurrences, the ones that we think have the best chance of being commercial. And not just federal lands, but also tribal lands. So that introduces the goals and objectives and the desires of the indigenous groups, and how they feel about developing those. And watching the Canadians over the years on all this, I mean, we face a lot of that here. So sensible public lands policies and getting on the same page with tribal groups upstream is probably, the most important thing. Then to your point, Khalil, on processing, everybody talks about mining and nobody ever talks about smelting. People don't like smelting very much. We've done a really good job of
You don't like,
shutting down
you
smelting.
don't like mining either.
And,
and that's
I've been
challenge.
I was trying to work through the data last year on some stuff, and like some of the easier numbers, like we used to have around 30 aluminum smelters. A lot of them were developed with the large hydroelectric projects out west, especially in the Pacific Northwest. That electricity, federally subsidized, was really, really cheap. And aluminum smelters like cheap electricity. I mean, that is just, those two things go together, and over the years we've gone from 30 aluminum smelters to 4 or 3. I have to think about where things stand with the one in Missouri. That's an enormous. Now, this have to be the largest aluminum producer in the world, but this is a great illustration of the dilemma that we have as Americans. What are we really willing to do, and how we'll do it? Some of those smelters were in Texas. So back in the 1970s, during our response to that oil price shock, when things were blowing and going down here, and we're drilling offshore, the shelf is, Gulf of Mexico shelf is under intense development and everything else. We were making aluminum, making steel, fabricating metal in Texas, oil country goods, and we don't do that anymore. So we've shut down all the lead smelters. Well, there's a lot of reasons why people don't like lead smelters, but a lot of stuff gets captured that's very useful when you process lead. We have one zinc smelter that doesn't have sufficient capacity for all of the zinc mining, and these things are important because a lot of the minerals that are in contention, where we have seen China in particular take specific actions to try to influence the supply of minerals that they control, germanium, gallium, antimony, all of these are drop out of the supply chain, the processing side, the midstream, let's say, of minerals, so like lead, zinc, copper, and so on. So if we don't do it here, then we're risking economic and national security because we have no other way to get them, unless somebody else, produces them for us. So there was this multi-pronged approach, in the previous administration that got rolled out. Try to restore mining in the United States, processing in the United States, also invest abroad. I don't think we've done a very good job with either one, frankly. To restore mining and processing in the United States, you really have to make a case to the American people. Here's why it's important. And we have to have a better regulatory framework and a better labor
You have to commit to it.
cost. Otherwise, we're just not competitive.
Yeah.
And have an honest conversation about that. And then to go abroad, we have to decide whether we're really willing to have, the Secretary of State running around the world doing minerals deals. There are a lot of other things that person could be doing, So those are that loaded question of what about mining in the United States? Boy, that's a really loaded question. And we can't just, rely on, say, the Canadians. That's we have to have a full conversation with them about, what it is that we're all doing and how what's the benefit to them as the counterparty.
Yeah.
Yeah. Michelle, with the mining projects that are maybe currently going on around the U.S., I know, Brent, you had mentioned that you've gotten a few calls recently on things that you never heard of in the last 20 years. What's kind of the direction of things right now in terms of like what's actionable and actually happening? And then also any kind of sniffs of things from the administration as far as what their approach is going to be on this?
Well, so the things that have been moving the quickest are things, again, where you're out of the federal domain, the public lands domain. So I'm sure, whatever phone calls you might be getting would be people who are looking at occurrences and access to resources that are in private lands that can be negotiated.
They are.
And that those projects have been moving, but they're moving unevenly because of lack of other things. So like We're so accustomed in oil and gas leasing and in the standard petroleum land agreements and all of that. The disposition of those minerals in terms of rights and everything else, that's very well understood. When it comes to brines and brine-based minerals and other things like pore space for carbon dioxide sequestration or anything else,
Yeah.
it's a
The
pretty
rules of the
murky,
game aren't published.
pretty murky
You
world.
know?
We had in our energy summit at the Baker Institute last October on a panel I chaired related to minerals and materials. We had a representative from SLB. SLB has a direct lithium extraction subsidiary that they are running, and the request in terms of a wish list, a request was clarity on lithium. If you're going to go into the business of extracting lithium, it'd be nice to know who owns it and what royalty is going to be charged.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The rules of it's very much with the whole pore space and constituent mineral space. The rules of the game really aren't written.
Right.
And so, that needs to be cleared up. It needs to be, we're very much in the land grab phase of things, and people are grabbing what they think.
But you can't move forward with projects without some clarity on that other stuff. So that's the private lands bucket. So when you look at minerals projects today, mining projects, I mean, you can put, if you want, brine-based extraction in the minerals, hopper. That part clearly needs, work.
Can I ask one more question kind of on that, brine? Because I think we're probably closest there to getting some clarity, right? In the states that at least we're active in now. What other minerals could be extracted from brine? We talk about open
you
mining
look
and
at
things, big thing, but
South Arkansas, where Exxon took its position in the Magnolia area. That those were the South Arkansas has hosted a bromine extraction industry for a very
for
long
years.
time. Over in
Years.
California, we've got the one producer of boron, which actually people should worry more about than they do. So there is you can extract a lot, but remember, I mean, to use the gold in the ocean analogy, the concentrations have to be high enough. A lot of the DLE developers, including SLB, but also, some of their competitors, people with alternative processes and so on, tell us that they think they can be commercial at low concentrations, but they have to test it out and see. And so this is something that we've seen historically with brine resources. You really need robust concentrations to be comfortable. So robust meaning, 800 parts per million, 1200 parts per million. If you look at, where we are in our brines, 1600 parts per million would be, like pretty good. I think, look at Chile and the Atacama and it's 6,000 parts per million, So that's the reality, but you're here. So one of the tricks in all of this for the U.S. mineral side is, do you benefit because you're U.S. based, so you're closer to the customer? Your cost might improve because supply chain logistics are more in your favor than projects that are overseas. That's the trade-off that people are struggling with, to do work. Does it make sense?
But if we're not processing here, does that even matter?
Well, that's the thing. So you have to have, processors have to come into the picture and be willing to put, to put out the form of lithium that the customers need. And so that's a separate conversation, So, and then the same thing is true. You go over to the federal land side, the public land side, if you can get past that hurdle, we've got metals projects that have been trying to get off the ground for a long, long, long time and haven't really made much progress. So,
it's hard to do it in 4 and 8 year windows.
Yeah. There are some
difficult.
things, like up in Utah at the venerable Bingham Canyon's largest copper mine, one of the largest copper mines anywhere. They have expanded refining capacity to be able to process waste. I mean, this is something that Freeport-McMoRan is looking at doing for their Arizona operations. Everybody's looking at that kind of stuff. And looking at what it would take to invest in additional circuits to capture additional metals out of those, concentrate streams. And a lot of, I would say, startups, either, if they're, pure new greenfield projects or brownfield projects, everyone is looking at, what can I add in processing so that I'm not capturing, just copper, just cobalt, but also tellurium, indium, and other things of interest that are important for manufacturing a lot of the stuff that that we're talking about trying to manufacture anyway.
Yeah. Well, it
Yeah.
sounds like we're once again putting the cart before the horse. We haven't addressed the manufacturing thing as
I
a
get this
society,
question all
but
the
we're
time. What has to happen in federal policy, to make all of this work, and it's not. It's actually go over to the Environmental Protection Agency, because a lot of what
Yeah.
affected smelting and processing historically has been clean air, clean water, toxic substances, hazardous materials, Superfund. Those have been
Yeah.
the worst, and, the most difficult things on businesses that we're having a tough time in terms of commercial, sustaining themselves commercially anyway. So you can look at the lead smelter rules in the Clean Air Act, and pretty much link that directly
but-
to yeah.
Yeah.
So again, it's how do we do this stuff? Where are we willing to do it? Can we
What are
do
we
it,
willing to
and meet
sacrifice
public
for
interest
society?
expectations?
Yeah.
And then if not, you really have to rethink, what it is that you're doing. And I think it's been too easy for people to kick the can to other countries and say, well, if we're not going to process it and smelt it here, the Indians will. Well, goodness,
Until they won't.
until they will. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we've done a really good job of exporting industries that we viewed to be hazardous, but that because of our labor costs or other things really just weren't working here anymore, and sending them off to places that actually didn't have all the layers of protection that we do.
Well,
Yeah,
Michelle,
it just makes me curious. Sorry, kind of maybe last thing here as we wrap up, but I'm just with the new administration and tariffs, how does all of this apply with the tariffs if like we really need these materials, but we're, potentially taxing people on them? And it's just a whole
That's
mind game.
big $4 gazillion question, right? I mean, I don't
Yeah,
know.
seriously.
No, I don't. There hasn't been enough clarity around tariffs. My view on that, by the way, is that it's really a negotiating thing. It's carrot stick.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's a
I
Exactly.
think it's the stick part
I
of
think
the
the
negotiation.
news this week on Colombia related to immigration issues and on all of that, I think is a good example of it. I think how we're dealing with Russia
Right.
and China are going to end up the same way. But the situation with China is serious in many respects that we don't have time to get into. So it requires some careful thought about how we do things and what kind of signals we're sending and all of that. I don't like tariffs on things. I think, what we really need to do is look internally and we're not the only ones. The Germans are going to have to do this too. Why are we not competitive in these businesses? Do we want to be competitive in some of these businesses? And if so, what will it take? And if we're not willing to take those steps, then what do we do as an alternative? I think that's the conversation that we have to have. That's just my own opinion.
Yeah. Michelle, you've obviously given your career, and
So let me tell
even
you
your
in
signal
closing,
career.
we have an idea. This is so two things, by the way. I don't know when y'all are going to make this live, but I was invited to get to hang out with landmen again at your technology workshop or your technical workshop. April 3rd,
Yeah.
I think it is.
Yep, it's one of the biggest ones of the year.
Your association listeners, I'll be with everybody again that day up at Exxon's campus. We're talking about there's an idea of actually doing a carbon nanotube. Maybe I shouldn't give the whole thing away because I don't want to undermine
Well, it's
it.
only our moms
We're
and
talking
grandmas
about
that
doing
listen
a
to this
carbon
anyway.
nanotube fiber demonstration at Rice University. That if we pull it off, if it gets done, everybody will want to come see it. I have to.
Oh, I'd love
let
to
me
go
just
see
say
it.
that you'll be able to see all of the virtues of that material, its strength, its ability to conduct electricity, a whole bit in a fun demonstration. So we're working on that because
Oh, that'd be
we
fantastic.
really need people to think about what we can do, how to invent our way out of this in many respects.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've got a big hill to climb to do all the things that require us to really do it on our own. But, we can innovate, we can make more efficient use of what we have and get better at what we can do.
Yeah.
And hopefully, there's a shift in mentality. And I think people start to recognize that we maybe over leveraged ourselves a little bit. And hopefully we'll be able to get to a point where we can start to address some of these things that we've neglected and get to a better place from an energy independence and really just substance. We need to be able to create the things that we need and not be so leveraged. So hopefully we'll get there. What's the next 2, 3, 4 years look like for you? What's the Baker Institute really focusing on in light of?
Like I said, I'm retired. So for me personally, it's a question of how much more time I will have and energy I have for all of this. It's hard to shut it off.
Yeah.
There's
Obviously
a lot
you're
of interesting
passionate
things
about
going on. I think what we're trying to do is head toward a demonstration of how we can help people do better thinking around all of the, just in a more organized way about all of this realm of energy and materials and how to think about it, consistently and in a way that can accommodate more of the trade-offs than we've done so far. So we're working on that. We're going to try to get that off the ground. And in the meantime, our main focus is just to try to get as much information out there as we can so that people can be informed. And look at all of this without getting, caught. The cone of uncertainty is pretty big, right? So anything that we can do to help manage that is that's the number one thing.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your second career and what you're doing. Thank you for supporting Layman and speaking at our events and helping inform us. I mean, we're all to a certain extent reactive to what's coming to us for these energy projects. So the more informed we are from people like you, the better we are, the better we can help articulate things that we're asked to do on behalf of energy developers, all over the country. So once again,
Sure.
thank you, Michelle.
Well,
really,
thank you,
really
Michelle.
appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It was a privilege, an honor. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So if you are retired, do you want to give out your information for people to reach out to you or?
I'm on the Baker Institute website. People want to follow the research we're doing and look at what's going on. Can find us there. We're in LinkedIn. Can find us there. We get, inquiries all the time. Happy to field them. There's a lot of stuff going on. So people who are, chasing things and want, have questions that they think we might be able to help with should send them over.
Fantastic. Khalil will put that in the show notes. I don't even know how to do that.
Yeah, it'll all be there.
Yeah.
It'll all be there.
Yeah. Just put the web link in there and they'll get it.
Thank you, Michelle.
Sounds good.
Appreciate your
Thanks,
time.
Michelle.
Y'all take care.
Enjoyed today's topic? Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Learn more at dudley-land.com. See you next episode.